Okay, we're back to recording. So we're back to continuing with the PowerPoint. Okay, so uh, the whole purpose of the kidneys is to modify the urine depending upon blood pressure, concentration of ions, and uh, the pathway is ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. And the bladder is going to store and excrete the urine when need be. We said that the ureters come from the renal pelvis to the urinary bladder. Uh, the smooth muscle in the walls to help drive the urine toward the bladder. The bladder stretches. We won't talk about any of this. Everybody knows the bladder can stretch, and it can get your attention when it's full. So here's the basic anatomy. There's the bladder. Here's the ureter coming from the kidneys. So that then you're going to have the urethra, which in males goes through the prostate gland and ultimately out through the penis, which is allows elimination of urine from the bladder. So here's the rectum behind the bladder, and prostate gland can cause problems in males called BPH, benign prostate hypertrophy. If this prostate gland begins to grow and enlarge, it often squeezes this urethra here, and that makes it difficult for males to urinate. And as you get older, the bladder is less distensible, and well, when the older you get, the more you go to the bathroom. Okay, in the female, I mentioned that the urethra is much shorter. You have the ovaries here and the uterus, but the bladder is receiving the storage from the ureters, but they're just emphasizing the shortness of the urethra in females. So they decided not to put the ureters dumping into the bladder. So here's the ureter, here's the bladder, and then here's the prostate, and there's various sphincters that are going to help clamp down the release of urine from the bladder so that you can control urination and not be incontinent. Older humans tend to be incontinent, meaning they have difficulty controlling release of urine from the bladder when they want it. Often they lose control. So I mentioned this, the urethra is longer. The external sphincters is skeletal muscle, and it's under voluntary control. You can try to hold your urine, and if you're young, you usually can do a good job. If you're older, it doesn't quite work. Okay, so there's a micturition reflex, which means urination. So the stretch receptors in the bladder wall, as the bladder fills with urine, it's going to have a reflex that's going to relax these sphincters and permits the internal sphincter to open, and hopefully at that point you're in a proper place to void your urine. So we can summarize this reflex. So the sensory nerves in the urinary bladder sense enlargement of the bladder. That message is sent to the lower spinal cord, and that's going to lead to relaxation of the external sphincter, and then projecting into the brain, and then you end up with release of urine once you have the stimulation of the bladder. So these neurons are going to stimulate the detrusor muscle to contract the bladder. Okay. So homeostasis, the kidney has to keep the amount of blood volume constant and balanced with the amount of sodium and ions and keep the pH constant. So you have the intracellular fluid, which is 60% of total body water. The extracellular fluid is 40%, and water moves freely within this space to end up in the cytoplasm. So if you have the intracellular fluid, which is found primarily inside the cells, the extracellular fluid, which is the plasma, and the interstitial fluid. And so the kidney is going to maintain this concentration of water in the cells, the amount of water in the cells, and plasma is going to be involved in keeping the blood volume and blood pressure at an appropriate level. There's other extracellular fluid in these other compartments. So if you look at the relative concentration, you can see that in the intracellular fluid, there's a large concentration of potassium and little concentration of sodium. The plasma has a very high concentration of sodium, little potassium, and the same thing in the interstitial fluid. So the body works to maintain high potassium concentration inside of cells and to maintain very high sodium concentration outside of cells. Okay, so we'll stop there and let's go back and stop here. And what do I do now? Stop recording. Stop recording.